The sun glared down on the cracked sidewalk of Maplewood, a small town where kids played hopscotch in the streets and neighbors waved from porches. But not all children felt safe here. Not little Amaya, a 7-year-old with tightly coiled hair and wide, wary eyes, who clutched her worn backpack straps so tightly they dug into her small shoulders. She had been walking alone for weeks, heart hammering every time a car slowed near her or someone loitered by the corner store. This morning, she stood frozen at the edge of the street, staring at the group of 3 Hells Angels bikers rolling slowly toward her on their roaring Harley-Davidsons. Chrome glinted in the sun, tattoos peeked out from leather vests, and boots clamped heavy on the pavement. To any other child, they might have looked intimidating. To Amaya, they were hope. She swallowed hard, her lips trembling, and ran a few steps toward them. "Please, can you walk me to school?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Her brown eyes, wide and earnest, locked on the largest biker, a man named Rico, whose arms were thick and scarred, each mark a story untold. I don't feel safe alone." Rico glanced at his brothers, Jax and Troy, who exchanged subtle nods. There was a brief silence, broken only by the rev of their engines, before Rico knelt to her level, voice gentle but firm. "You want us to walk you?" She nodded vigorously, almost in disbelief. "Yes, please." Without another word, the bikers parked, lifted off their helmets, and gestured for her to step between them. The sound of engines faded as they fell into a protective formation, 3 hulking figures surrounding one small girl. People passing by stopped and stared, some whispered, but the bikers didn't care. They were here to protect. As Amaya took her first tentative step, clutching Rico's hand, she noticed something strange. The neighborhood didn't feel as scary anymore. The shadows seemed smaller, the menacing faces less threatening. But just as she started to relax, a black SUV slowed near the corner. 2 men inside exchanged glances and stepped out, their intentions unreadable but clearly wrong. Rico tensed, instincts kicking in. "Keep walking," he muttered, voice low. But the SUV's occupants were already moving toward the sidewalk. The bikers tightened their circle around her, a wall of leather and muscle that radiated warning and authority. Amaya's stomach knotted. This was exactly why she needed them. But what the bikers did next, a move so simple yet so decisive, would make her realize she wasn't just being walked to school. She was being protected, in a way no one else in her life had ever done. As the black SUV's passengers approached, the bikers didn't hesitate. Rico positioned himself directly in front of Amaya, his broad shoulders acting as a shield. Jax and Troy flanked her, moving with precise, almost silent coordination, as if every step had been practiced countless times. The men in the SUV stopped, clearly sizing up the trio, but the sheer presence of the bikers made them falter. It wasn't just muscle, it was the kind of confidence that came from living life on the edge and protecting the vulnerable without question. Amaya's small hand tightened around Rico's fingers, her knuckles white. "Are they going to hurt us?" she whispered, voice trembling. Rico bent slightly, so his eyes were level with hers. "Not while we're here. You just keep walking, and we'll make sure nothing touches you." The SUV's men muttered between themselves, unsure if they were dealing with ordinary people or something else entirely. Troy's eyes, cold and calculating, followed their every move. Jax subtly shifted closer to the sidewalk, his arms relaxed but ready to strike if needed. The bikers weren't looking for trouble, but if trouble found them, they were ready to make it regret ever showing its face. Amaya's heart still raced, but she began to notice small, reassuring things. The way Troy kept an eye on the crosswalks, the way Jax subtly positioned himself so no one could block her path, the way Rico's presence made her feel like she was walking inside a bubble of safety. With each step, her confidence grew, not because the bikers were intimidating, but because she felt seen and protected, something she hadn't felt in months. The men from the SUV eventually muttered a curse under their breath and retreated to their car, clearly unwilling to challenge the Hells Angels. Rico's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, though he never let his guard down entirely. "You see? Nothing to worry about," he said, letting a small, reassuring smile brush his scarred face. By now, Children on the street had begun to notice the unusual procession. A tiny girl flanked by 3 massive bikers, walking calmly, without fear. Neighbors peeked from windows, some with admiration, some with curiosity. But Amaya didn't care. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe walking through her own neighborhood. As they neared the school, the bikers subtly adjusted their formation, ensuring Amaya remained at the center. The building loomed ahead, intimidating in its size, but she walked taller now, shoulders straighter, knowing she had allies she could trust. And the bikers, in their silent, watchful way, sent a clear message to anyone who might think of causing harm. This child was under their protection, and no threat would go unanswered. By the time they reached the school gates, Amaya's fear had mostly dissipated. But she hadn't yet realized that the bikers' actions today were only the beginning of a lesson she would carry with her forever. A lesson about courage, loyalty, and the unexpected kindness of people who lived on the edges of society yet had the largest hearts of all. As the bikers escorted Amaya through the school gates, the usual bustle of students and teachers seemed to pause, as if the world itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Amaya clutched Rico's hand tightly, her other hand gripping her backpack strap, feeling a strange mixture of pride and relief. She had never walked through these gates without her stomach twisting into knots, but now she felt different. Stronger, braver, and protected. Rico crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "You did good today, Amaya. Remember that. You stayed calm, you didn't freeze, and you didn't let fear control you." Amaya nodded, her eyes wide. I was scared," she admitted softly. "But I felt like I wasn't alone." Jax, standing tall behind her, added in his gravelly voice, "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about facing it anyway. And you just did that." Troy, ever the watchful one, scanned the schoolyard before giving a small nod. "And if anyone tries to mess with you, they'll have to deal with us first." Amaya's eyes widened. "You'd really do that?" she asked, barely believing it. Rico smiled, a faint, weathered smile that carried a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. "Kid, it's not about doing favors. It's about protecting the ones who can't protect themselves. That's the rule we live by." Teachers and students had begun to take notice. Whispers traveled through the playground. 3 bikers, massive and tattooed, walking a tiny girl to school. Some were wary, some impressed, but all could see the bond forming between the child and her unlikely guardians. Amaya felt her chest swell with a pride she had never known. For once, she didn't feel small. She felt seen, important, and, for the first time, truly safe. Rico's eyes flicked to the perimeter of the school, scanning for potential threats. "Stay close, Amaya. You're safe with us, but it's important you understand, your safety isn't magic. It comes from paying attention, from trusting the people who care for you, and from standing tall even when you're afraid." Amaya nodded vigorously. She didn't fully understand all the words, but she understood the feeling behind them. Her small hands still gripped Rico's fingers, her feet moving with newfound purpose. She could see the horizon of her day stretching out before her, not threatening but open, full of possibility. The bikers lingered for a few moments, making sure she entered her classroom safely, her teacher giving a warm, slightly bewildered nod at the sight of the massive guardians. Only when Amaya turned and waved did Rico, Jax, and Troy step back. They mounted their bikes again, engines rumbling like a quiet promise. As they rode away, the children in the playground whispered among themselves. Some thought it was strange, some thought it was cool, but all of them felt the power of the protection Amaya had received. And in the heart of that small girl, a spark had ignited, a lesson that courage and kindness could come from the most unexpected places, and that even the smallest voice could matter when strong hearts stood beside it. As the bikers rode back through the quiet streets of Maplewood, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Rico's mind drifted momentarily. Protecting a child like Amaya wasn't new for him, but every time it happened, it reminded him of the scars that shaped him, the fights he'd endured, and the people he'd lost along the way. He glanced at Jax and Troy riding alongside him. They too were quiet, reflecting the shared understanding that being a biker wasn't just about freedom or rebellion, It was about loyalty, protection, and moral strength. Rico's voice broke the silence. You know, seeing her today, scared and small, it hits me every time. Some kids have no one, and some people don't even realize how much danger is out there until it's right in front of them. Jax nodded, eyes forward, muscles tense as he guided his Harley along the cracked pavement. Yeah. And that's why we do what we do. Not for respect. Not for money. We do it because someone's got to stand up when the world turns its back. Troy's gaze lingered on the rearview mirror, watching the small neighborhood recede behind them. Kids like her, they see the world differently after this. Maybe a little safer. Maybe a little braver. That's worth the trouble we get sometimes. Meanwhile, Amaya had returned to her classroom, but she couldn't stop thinking about the bikers. Their presence had shifted something inside her, a sense of confidence she'd never felt before. She could still hear the low rumble of their engines in her mind, a reminder that someone was always watching out for her, and that courage didn't mean being fearless, it meant having the strength to keep going even when fear was present. After school, the principal noticed the unusual partnership. She called Amaya over and whispered softly, "I saw them walking you today. That was incredible." Amaya shrugged, trying to play it cool, but her wide eyes betrayed her awe. I wasn't alone," she said simply. "And they made sure I was safe." Back on the streets, the bikers paused at a corner cafe. Rico removed his helmet and leaned against the tank, letting out a slow breath. "Some people think we're just troublemakers," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "But moments like today, they remind me why we ride together, why we stick together, why we protect the ones who can't fight for themselves." Jax gave a small chuckle. "And that little girl, she'll remember this. She'll carry it with her. We're not just guarding her body, we're giving her hope." Troy smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And that, my friends, is worth every stare, every whisper, every skeptical look we get in town. Because at the end of the day, it's about making a difference, even if it's just one life." As the three bikers mounted their Harleys again, the rumble of their engines filled the streets, a declaration of protection, loyalty, and courage. Somewhere up ahead, Amaya's laughter could be heard as she played with friends at the schoolyard, unaware of the deep impression today had left, not just in her mind, but in the small town she called home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Maplewood as Rico, Jax, and Troy rode through the neighborhood, the rhythmic hum of their Harley engines echoing like a heartbeat through the quiet streets. They weren't finished yet. The bikers knew that danger often lingered where it was least expected, and someone like Amaya, small and trusting, could be an easy target for the wrong people. As they approached a narrow side street near the park, Troy's sharp eyes caught movement. Two older boys, teenagers, lingered near a chain-link fence, their posture aggressive, eyes following the small group of bikers who were walking a young girl. It wasn't a direct threat yet, but the warning signs were clear: taunts, smirks, the way they nudged each other, ready to push their luck. Rico slowed his bike, shifting so that the three of them formed a triangular barrier. Jax leaned slightly forward, hands resting near his leather vest as if to remind the boys that while they weren't looking for a fight, they weren't afraid either. "Keep moving," Rico said to Amaya, his voice calm but carrying a weight that left no room for misunderstanding. Amaya nodded quickly, trusting them completely, and walked a few steps ahead as the bikers flanked her on each side. The older boys took one step closer, emboldened by their size and number. "What's a little girl doing with those losers?" one sneered. His words were sharp, intended to provoke. But the bikers didn't flinch. Instead, Troy's eyes locked on them, steady and unyielding. "Step back," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. The boys paused, unsure if they were about to be challenged in a way that would have consequences they hadn't anticipated. Rico tilted his head slightly, his presence alone creating a tension that made the boys rethink their plan. "She's not alone. You're choosing to mess with the wrong people today," he said. There was no threat in his tone, just fact. The street seemed to hold its breath as the boys realized that this wasn't a game and that these men were prepared to protect the child at all costs. Finally, with muttered curses, the teenagers backed away, retreating down the street as quickly as they dared. Amaya's small shoulders relaxed, and she let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked up at Rico, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. You scared them away," she whispered. Rico crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "No, kid. You didn't need to be scared. You just needed to keep walking. And we'll always be here to make sure you can do that safely." The three bikers continued walking her toward her home, their presence an invisible shield that ensured no one would dare cross the path they had chosen to guard. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, bathing the streets in a golden glow, but the safety and reassurance they provided didn't come from light. It came from loyalty, courage, and the moral strength of men who had chosen to be guardians in a world that often turned its back on the vulnerable. Amaya began to understand something profound that day, that bravery could be learned, that protection could be given, and that sometimes, the most unlikely people, the ones who rode motorcycles and wore leather, could become the heroes she had been silently hoping for all along. By the time they reached the corner near Amaya's home, the sun had softened into a warm, amber glow. The streets, once filled with the shadows of imagined threats, now seemed almost peaceful. But Rico, Jax, and Troy didn't lower their guard. They knew that safety wasn't something permanent. It was something earned and maintained with awareness and vigilance. Amaya glanced up at the three towering bikers and felt a strange mix of admiration and comfort. Why do you help me?" she asked quietly. Her small voice barely carried over the hum of the motorcycles as they walked beside her, ensuring she never had to cross a street alone or face someone who might want to intimidate her. Rico paused for a moment, considering how to answer a question that had echoed in his mind countless times, not just today but in his life of unexpected guardianship. "Because someone has to," Rico said finally, his voice low and steady. "Someone has to stand up when people can't protect themselves. Someone has to make sure you can walk to school without fear. That's what we do. That's what it means to care." Amaya nodded, absorbing his words with the earnest understanding only a child could possess. "And it's nice," she whispered. They reached her street. The familiar row of modest houses came into view, the windows glowing softly in the late afternoon sun. Amaya's home wasn't grand or imposing, but it was hers, a place that should have felt safe all along. She looked at the bikers, a question lingering in her eyes. Would they leave now? Jack smiled, a rare warmth breaking through his normally stoic expression. "We'll always make sure you get here safely," he said. "Even if it's just a walk, even if no one else notices. That's what we do." Troy nodded, his eyes scanning the street one last time for any lingering threat, before finally relaxing. Amaya turned toward her front door, her little hand clutching the doorknob. She paused and looked back at them. Will you come tomorrow too?" she asked hesitantly, hope and shyness mixing in her tone. Rico placed a reassuring hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll be around. But remember, courage comes from inside too. You've already learned to walk tall, Amaya. We're just here to make sure nothing shakes you while you do it." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. As she opened the door and stepped inside, the three bikers stood together in the fading sunlight, their silhouettes strong and unyielding. They had walked a child to school, yes, but in the process, they had given her something far more enduring, a sense of safety, self-worth, and the quiet knowledge that even in a world that could be harsh, there were people willing to stand up for what was right. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows over the quiet street, and the bikers mounted their motorcycles once more, the rumble of the engines carrying them away, but leaving behind an indelible lesson. In every corner of the town, someone had witnessed courage without violence, protection without pride, and kindness without expectation. The next morning, Maplewood streets were quieter than usual, but Amaya didn't feel the same fear she had weeks before. She walked to school with her head held high, backpack snug on her shoulders, knowing that someone was watching out for her. Even when the bikers weren't physically beside her, their presence lingered in her mind, a steady reassurance that she wasn't alone. Inside the classroom, she shared her story with her teacher, speaking with a confidence she hadn't possessed before. The teacher listened, eyes wide, realizing that the child had experienced more bravery than many adults could imagine. Amaya's classmates also noticed a change in her, the way she stood tall, the way she spoke, the quiet courage shining in her small frame. Rico, Jax, and Troy rode past the school later that morning, keeping an unobtrusive watch. They didn't need praise or thanks. The smile Amaya had given them before stepping into class was enough. Their duty wasn't about recognition. It was about making sure the world treated the innocent with respect, and that those who were vulnerable could carry themselves with courage. By the end of the week, the pattern had become clear. Whenever Amaya walked to school, the bikers were near. It wasn't about control or intimidation. It was about creating a safe environment, teaching the child that the world could be dangerous but also full of people who chose to stand for justice. And for the first time in her young life, she felt secure, respected, and empowered. As the three bikers rode away one evening, the street quiet once again, Rico glanced at his brothers. "It's not about the streets we ride or the people who stare," he said. "It's about the lives we touch. And today, we made a difference." Jax nodded. One child, one walk at a time. That's enough to start changing a town. Troy smiled faintly. And the lesson lasts longer than any road we ride. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. True protection comes from loyalty, kindness, and moral strength, not power or intimidation. Even small acts, like walking a child to school, can make a life feel safe and valued. Standing up for the vulnerable changes not just one moment, but shapes a person's entire future. And sometimes, heroes come from the most unexpected places, teaching us that compassion is the greatest strength of all.